This is the narrated PowerPoint for Chapter 1, Do Engineers Use Rhetoric? From Dorothy Windsor's Writing Like an Engineer. So who was Dorothy Windsor? She taught at Iowa State, which has an excellent technical communication program. She also edited the Journal of Business and Technical Communication. She's since retired, and this is what she does now. She writes fantasy novels in that genre for middle school readers. She focuses mostly on girls that age. So a question she asks here in this chapter regarding rhetoric. There is something of a problem with engineers and rhetoric. One is that they tend to say that they don't use it. And that's a little bit problematic because engineers do write quite a bit. If you ask a typical engineer if they write a lot, they will tell you yes, they write a lot. If you ask them if they expected to do a lot of writing when they were working on their undergraduate degree, they'll typically say no, they did not expect to be doing a lot of writing when they were working on their undergraduate degree. And typically, engineers don't go into engineering because they think, oh boy, I'm going to get to write lots of reports. They're more interested in designing things. And so they approach writing differently than we do in the arts and the humanities. Their purpose in writing is to create an object. For us, the writing that we do is the point of what we're doing. It's the object that we create. But for them, it's something else. In terms of the amount of writing that engineers do, and related to that second point about objects as a collection of documents, back in the pre-digital days, they estimated the weight of the documentation in a typical battleship. And this was the paper printed documents that told people how to use and to maintain all the different parts of a battleship. And it was estimated to be about 12,000 pounds, or about 6 tons. That's a lot of paper. And it's a lot of writing, and this is engineering writing. Engineers don't have the title technical communicator, but very typically in the job ads for them, it'll say something about the necessity of communication skills. But they are really technical communicators. It's something that they do, and that's why they typically take a service course in what we regard as a service course in technical communication for their degree. A lot of their different organizations that certify engineering programs require that they have their students take a technical communication course. So when we think about engineers using rhetoric, we might think about any type of object that can do any sort of harm to the user. Typically has cautions, warnings, and dangers associated with it, depending upon how dangerous it actually is. A caution is, you could, if you misuse a product, you might hurt yourself, or you might damage the product itself. But a warning is is a threat to life or limb, and a danger is a more immediate threat to life or limb. You could get killed, you could blow your arm off, or what have you, with this particular product. So yeah, they for that reason, if no other, and actually problems with danger go back to the very source of rhetorical theory with the ancient Greeks and their courts and so forth. A lot of times what those courts are trying to do is to manage risk. So for example, you might have a farmer who's bringing a load of wheat into an ancient Greek city-state, and somebody jumps him and steals his load of wheat. And so he continues into the city, goes to the forum, to the legislature, and says, hey, we need laws about this, about people stealing wheat from us farmers. So they're managing risk, they're managing danger, things like that, from the very beginning. And that's something that rhetoric and engineering have in common. Now, the Challenger disaster is another good example. There it is, and that's what it looked like when it exploded. But and this is something that's been written about quite a bit. It's been written about extensively in technical communication with the Challenger disaster. Now, the Columbia disaster hasn't, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But again, with the Challenger disaster, you recall, the problem was with these O-rings, and there were two sets of people there that were in charge of the launch of the Challenger. One was the engineers. They were saying, hey, wait a minute, these O-rings could crack, it could have disastrous consequences. And then the other set of people were managers who said, no, we've done this before, there's never been a problem, we're going to go ahead and launch, even though, it got unusually cold down in the 30s, and that caused the O-rings to crack and the Challenger to blow up. And so there's been blame for this. There was a congressional investigation, and to this day there are some who blame the managers for not listening to the engineers, and there are some who blame the engineers for not being able to argue effectively. And so that's why it's important that people like me teach engineers that their work is rhetorical, and teach them certainly some strategies to be persuasive. That's something that I try to do as well. Engineers too, they are knowledge workers. They kind of like the doctor never gives you a shot. Engineers they don't build the things that they design. They are knowledge workers. They create the designs. They don't do the actual work. And so for that reason too, their work is rhetorical. They have to convince others that their design is the best way to do something. And that takes us back too as well to the difference between science and engineering. Scientists are interested in creating knowledge for the sake of creating knowledge, for finding out more about our physical and our natural world, about the life sciences and the physical sciences. And engineers, or at least traditionally this was the difference, engineers were interested in doing and applying science so they can do things like build locomotives, for example, back in the early 19th century. In the 18th century, scientists were experimenting with getting steam to move things, just to move, basically, inanimate objects. And engineers thought that was pretty cool, and they became interested in developing what became trains. Back in the beginning, there was also the difference. The people who were scientists were generally they were wealthy people. They were wealthy usually businessmen. There were some women involved as well, who were people of leisure. They didn't actually have to work. They had gotten wealthy from business, or they were aristocrats, and so they turned their attention to science, what they could learn. And the engineers were the middle class who were interested in better jobs and learning to take that science and design it into usable products. So, from the very beginning, we see engineers as knowledge workers. Now, today there's lots of research going on in engineering. They're no longer sitting around waiting for scientists to make discoveries they can then go and apply. To some extent, it might still work that way today, but more and more engineering is doing its own research. And that'll definitely be true with any type of green economy that we get into. So there will be science being done, certainly. So Windsor tells us a political address is obviously persuasive in a way that a progress report or a test report is not, and that's certainly true. They are very different. We talked about the political address, making use, for example, of ethos, pathos, and logos, and the progress report would certainly make use of logos and certainly ethos to some degree, but not pathos as much. Uh, it is still a species of persuasion, so we have to think about how do engineers enact rhetoric, and we'll be getting into that more in the next chapter when we talk about different genres. So Windsor, in the first chapter here, she defines her study. She says that it's longitudinal, which means it takes place over a period of time, and it is a 5-year study. It did follow these young men from the Engineering Institute, and this is a special institute that GM was running, General Motors, and it followed them from first year composition into the workplace, so she could talk to them about how they grew and matured as writers. It's also, she refers to it as a multiple case study, and what she means by that is that each one of these young men are a case study unto themselves. And she wants to see how they grow as rhetoricians, as they grow as engineers. And she also has her research questions in this chapter. So if you deny that you're using rhetoric, then how do you explain your own language use? That's one of her big questions. If they don't call it rhetoric, then what do they call it? And how do we, this is especially important for technical communicators, how do we reconcile how we do things when we write with how they do things when they write? What types of problems does this create for people who are recent high school graduates who may have taken a year or two more of science and typically no engineering, though perhaps some advanced math courses? How do they make the entry into this world of the engineer? How do they learn to create the documents that engineers need to know how to create? So Windsor traces part of the problem to our educational system, and the end of that second bullet point is actually something that I added. And part of the problem is that in our educational systems we have a tendency to regard texts as sacred, and that has to do, I think, a lot with the roots of educational institutions, especially higher education, in the church. So this is something that we need to be conscious of. She also brings up the term of discourse community. And what a discourse community is, it's a group of people who share a literature. And when I say the term literature, of course, I'm talking about it in the way in which we talked about it earlier this semester, in terms of a review of a literature. Every discipline creates its own body of knowledge and encodes it, by writing it down. and using images often as well. But that becomes a discourse community, and very often people who are outside that discourse community find it difficult to enter it. A lot of times they don't know the words. The vocabulary is limiting, and they don't understand the concepts that very often the vocabulary is a very large part of. So, in terms of your being oriented to the study, I especially recommend that you read pages 14 through 18. Questions? I'll see you online.